This week, Israeli fighter jets struck Hamas targets inside Gaza after the terror group launched dozens of incendiary weapons into southern Israel. The strikes are the first since the end of last month's war between Hamas and Israel. This video shows Hamas terrorists arming arson balloons aimed at southern Israel and designed to create havoc and destroy crops inside Israel. The balloons ignited over 25 fires, and this map shows the number of fires set in 2021. Israel reportedly warned Hamas the situation will escalate if the balloon attacks do not stop. Hamas launched the balloons to protest the annual flag parade in Jerusalem that retraces the steps Israeli paratroopers took to liberate the city in the 1967 Six-Day War. Before the march, Hamas called for a day of rage and warned Israel to stop the event or risk another war. Despite Hamas's threats, the march proceeded, but officials did alter the route so it wouldn't go into the Muslim quarter of the old city. The largely peaceful march included shouts of "The people of Israel live," but was also marred by shouts of "Death to Arabs." New Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid condemned those comments. As a response to the arson balloons, Israeli planes hit Hamas military targets and said it held it responsible for everything that happens inside the Gaza Strip. Israel also deployed Iron Dome anti-missile batteries in the south in case Hamas fired more rockets into Israel. Hamas launched more than 4,000 rockets into Israel last month. The Jerusalem March was the first major test for the new government led by Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. On June 13th, the Knesset voted to ratify the new coalition put together by Yair Lapid. That meant for the first time in 12 years, Beniamin Netanyahu is no longer Prime Minister of Israel and marked an historic sea change in Israeli politics. The new government posed for the traditional picture with Israeli President Reuven Rivlin. By the slimmest of margins, 60 to 59, the Knesset approved the new coalition government. During his speech, incoming Prime Minister Naftali Bennett was heckled constantly by members of the opposition. But Bennett, who was once Netanyahu's ally and now rival, recognized his former boss.
Thank
you, Benjamin Netanyahu, for many years of service and lots of achievements for Israel. As Prime Minister, you worked for many years with devotion and to our political and defensive power.
Netanyahu now serves as leader of the opposition and cited how his governments have transformed Israel.
Members of Knesset, our achievements from a marginal state to a rising power in the global arena, this is our way. Mine and my friends from the national bloc, my friends on the real right. And if it is destined for us to be in the opposition, we will do it with our backs straight until we topple this dangerous government and return to lead the country in our way.
Netanyahu questioned if Bennett would be willing to disagree with U.S. President Biden and vowed he would be back. Bennett now leads a checkerboard coalition of 8 parties representing left, center, right, and for the first time, an Arab Islamist party.
Well, it's true that this government has a very difficult path ahead of it, a narrow parliamentary majority, a very heterogeneous government, and in this respect it will be challenging to keep it together.
Right after the vote, the new government held its first cabinet meeting. It faces daunting challenges at home and threats outside its borders. Still, earlier this year, Bennett told CBN News he was up to the job.
I'm ready to take that responsibility as former defense minister, former entrepreneur and CEO of companies. I think I've got what's necessary to pull Israel out of this hole and sort of go to the next phase of Israel as the startup nation.
While President Joe Biden congratulated Bennett, differences between the two allies on the Iranian nuclear deal may test the new government.
The renewal of the nuclear agreement with Iran is a mistake that will give legitimacy again to one of the darkest and most violent regimes in the world. Israel will not let Iran arm itself with a nuclear weapon. Israel is not part of the deal and will continue to maintain full freedom of action.
After 4 elections and more than 2 years of political paralysis, it remains to be seen if this new government will provide the stability many Israelis are hoping for. CBN founder Pat Robertson asked former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo about Israel's new government on the 700 Club.
You know, Israel struck Hamas targets in Gaza last night. They've had more provocations. Do you think we're looking at some kind of a war over there? How do you take this new government they put in place?
Well, Pat, I'm very worried about that. Look, the new government on the security side, I think they'll be okay. Naftali Bennett is a conservative. He understands that he has to protect Israel and defend it. He knows that this is the central thesis of the state's security function. So I think they'll be okay, but that coalition is going to be a mess to govern. But just as importantly, the United States has separated itself from Israel these past 140 plus days now. The backing of Iran by going to Vienna, by saying we're going to go re-enter this deal and give the Iranians billions of dollars, gives courage to terrorists like Hamas, gives courage to terrorists like Hezbollah, and more importantly, gives them the money and missiles to create exactly the kind of havoc we saw a few weeks back now. We had it right. We built out these amazing accords for peace with Arab states. We made clear Iran wasn't going to have the resources it needed to foment terror, and that America would be a partner with Israel, whether that was moving our embassy to Jerusalem or saying that Israel has the right to the Golan Heights. Those are the kind of things that bad guys, Iranians and terrorists understand, and American weakness will make life really difficult for the Israelis, and it'll make the important American interest there less secure.